So before we go ahead and install the new unit, there's a couple of things from the old unit that we will need. If you have a damaged turbo, I would suggest replacing all of these components that I have here with new units, and we'll have that in the description below. However, I'm just going to show you, for the purpose of this video, a couple of things we could swap over, but I would honestly suggest, with the amount of money you're going to be spending on this, to put all new components in here. In the kit, there is this little valve or venturi, I guess it's called. This is actually part of the evap system that is installed in the bore of the turbo here. That little venturi is what's going to keep the boost pressure from entering your evap system. Not exactly sure on the mechanicals on how it exactly works. However, I do know that if this is not installed, you will get a check engine light for the evap system, which after doing a turbo would be kind of hard and tricky to figure out. Also, if you don't install this and you don't swap it over, you do have to take the turbocharger out, because this is actually mounted conveniently on the very bottom. You can see here the two exhaust stands here go between the cylinder heads, and the piece that we're going to be taking out is pointing directly at the bottom. So we do want to take note of this before we reinstall the turbocharger, just to keep any headaches from occurring. So it is a triple square that we're going to be removing. I believe it's a 12 millimeter. We're going to take the bolt out of here, and the bolt can certainly be reused, but again, if you do have any damage, if you have any metal throughout the car, no matter how much you clean this, you may still have a tiny little shaving, and you could be ruining your new turbocharger. So we are going to reuse that. We'll clean that up. So with a pick, I'm just going to take the old one out. It's kind of forced in there with those O-rings in place. So no damage to it, but honestly, if you did have metal going throughout your turbocharger, you wouldn't want to reuse that. For the new one, we do have new gaskets on the bolt that holds that in place. We do have two new O-rings, or crush washers, if you will, to replace that. And then we have the new venturi. So we just go ahead and cold side here, this little bore right here, you can see that there's a threaded connection, and that's where you're going to insert the venturi. You'll be able to see the installation of the venturi through the bore on the side here, but the actual bolt will ensure that it is fully seated as well. So go ahead and put a little bit of lubricant on the O-rings to make sure that they don't pinch or drag when you're installing that. So I'm just going to use a little bit of Vaseline on the O-ring here, just to make sure that it fully seats. You could certainly use a little bit of engine oil or silicone. Any lubricant should do, but obviously not too much is going to be a problem. So in the threaded connection, place the venturi with the green O-ring facing up. It should click somewhat into place. I have to use something to force it. My finger's a little too fat to get in there. You kind of see and feel it actually click into place once those O-rings engage. And then we're going to just put two new O-rings in the, or one new O-ring on the end of this. Certainly if you were going to be not replacing this, you would want to clean that up if you had a damaged turbo. All right, once we have that venturi fitted in there, we have the new seal in there, and we have the new or clean bolt in there, we are going to just torque that to 25 Newton meters. And that takes care of that. So our next thing that we do have to swap over or install is right here, the diverter valve. Do have the old one here. We are going to take the bolts out of there, and this is a quick inspection while we have it out. However, we are going to be installing a new genuine unit that we do stock here at fcpeuro.com, and we will have this in the description below. So looking at this one, we're probably not going to be able to see if this one is deformed or the diaphragm is damaged or anything, so the inspection is probably not going to tell us much. So it's a T30, removing these three bolts here. And again, if you do have a damaged turbo or you are experiencing boost leaks or something, I would not suggest swapping over this unit. I would highly suggest getting a replacement. Spring looks like it's working as it should. Normally the plastic cover on here would allow you to see into the diaphragm a little bit and see if there's any rips or tears. This one has this cover over here, which is not allowing us to see anything. So we are going to just need these three bolts for our new unit. And we do want to install that with the connector facing the passenger side of the vehicle. It does have a specific pattern to have it bolt in. So we're just going to fit those T30s real quick. So the torque spec on this is not much. It's only 9 Newton meters. You could certainly tighten this up by hand, but I'll show you how tight it actually is. As you saw, I moved the torque wrench with the tip of my finger. So you could just snug these bolts up. All right. And the next thing we're going to do is we are going to install the exhaust gasket. This here is not installed in the new unit. We do have to install that before we get the turbo in there, because this is going to be very hard to fit with the catalytic converter in the way. So just walk around the outside of this flange, pressing that all the way in, making sure it's fully seated, and maybe even tip it upside down and make sure it doesn't fall out, because we are going to have this moving around. We want to make sure that is fully engaged. And one more thing, we do have to take off this yellow cap on the oil drain here. When you take that out, it may actually let out some oil. Don't be alarmed. Go ahead and put a rag underneath it, or just make sure you brake clean it before we put it in. If you leave any of that oil on there, we may have a little bit of smoke on startup. But again, don't be alarmed. There's really nothing we can do about it, as this thing comes pre-oiled. So we will take this out of there, doing it without looking. Oh, and yeah, you can see there's a little bit of oil coming out. On the pipe that we're installing, there is a flange on one end, which I've already inserted this little plastic rivet in. I know it's a silly design. The flange with the little eyelet on there is what's going to go into the turbocharger. You'll see that it is threaded. Don't be fooled. You certainly could put a T30 in there, but I would advise against that. The reason that this is made of rubber here is because you want a little bit of flexibility for installing this. You noticed when I took this out, this actually stayed in the cylinder head, or into the engine block rather. But when you're going to put this in, the best way to get this in is actually putting it into the bottom of the turbo and kind of guiding it into place. And again, you want that flexibility. So they have this plastic rivet here, and they have this little rubber flange, if you will. So take a little bit of the oil from the bore that we just opened up, put that around your flange, and then line this up, kind of wiggling it into place, making sure you don't rip anything. And when that is lined up, you should be able to insert that plastic rivet. I'm going to use a pair of pliers here to get that inserted, but you are just going to push that into the threads and give it a good push into place. All right, that looks pretty secured. It is going to clock that in a position that should line this up fairly well. But just keep in mind, as you're dropping the turbocharger into place, you will have to keep an eye on this and make sure that it's engaging, and make sure that this doesn't roll the seal. Also, put a little bit of oil on that as well. So now we're going to go back over to the car and we'll show you how to drop this in. So now that we have the turbo assembled over on the bench, come back over here, and we do just want to take note that we have to replace a couple of the O-rings. You saw earlier on, we already replaced this line, which has a new O-ring on it. There is one more coolant line and one more oil line that we'll have to replace the seals on. The oil line here is going to have a black O-ring, as well as the other, except ours in particular, we've already done other DIYs in which we had this line off, and we have it with the updated seal. So I'll just go ahead with a 90-degree pick, or even a pocket screwdriver, and get that seal off. Same thing on this one. Obviously, this older one is probably going to be a little bit more difficult, and the ones that are in the turbo are rather cooked on there. All right, and again, just take one good look over everything, make sure all of your vacuum lines and everything is in the right place, all your wire harnesses, and make sure you've replaced all the seals that are necessary. So at this point, we're ready to drop the turbo in. It is going to be a little bit of a struggle trying to finagle this line in between the wastegate and the turbocharger, and also making sure everything else is free from getting caught. One thing I do want to take note of, when you're fitting this clamp, we will have to make sure that this actually has a good seat on that, and we'll get into a little bit further detail about that. But what I'm getting at is the weight of the turbo, the way that this is situated, this does have a little bit of ability to move. You don't want to fix this entirely down here because you want this to seal before this. So we are going to kind of tighten everything up in stages. So I just wanted to make note of that. We are going to want to make sure that the gasket on here is securely seated properly. So we are going to take off the tape on this and get ready to start installing. We're going to take our large V-band clamp. It's definitely a lot easier to put this on now as opposed to later on and having to open it up greatly. So I'm just going to swing that in the back there. That way we can get that on the turbo once the turbo is in place. So we're just going to use a little bit of Vaseline again and get the oil drain sufficiently lubricated so that it doesn't fight us when we drop this in, because this thing is going to be a little hard to see and a little hard to get your hand in there. So give it your best chance at installation. And again, it would definitely be a good time to have a friend handy to kind of hold these lines out of the way or remove that line entirely. And right before we drop it in, we are going to just clip the V-band clamp on, the smaller V-band clamp. It pretty much just secures in place here. Center it up the best you can. It will find its own home, but we do want to make sure we get that clamp centered on this as well. The gasket's in place. Let's go ahead and drop this in. So as I mentioned earlier, the oil drain is probably going to be the hardest part of this job. I am going to use a little panel tool here and try and guide it into place. It's obviously not secured in there very firmly, so you will have to kind of mess around with it to get into its place. All right, so now that we got the studs back out, we're going to go ahead and install the flange. We did fit the small V-band clamp onto the turbo and opened it up just enough so that we can have plenty of clearance and we can actually push it up past that flange. You may need to lift up on the turbo at the same time, kind of juggling the clamp, making sure that the gasket stays on that flange as well. All right, now once we backtracked a little bit, we can go ahead and reinstall our studs, and we're going to torque those back down to 15 Newton meters. All right, so we're going to snug these bolts up, and then we're going to snug this up, and then we're going to go back over to that side. I want to tighten this side up because it does have the flex joint in here, so the little bit of flex will kind of compensate the other side. So we are going to snug this up and then make sure this is seated while the turbo is still somewhat loose, and then go back to the other side. As the turbo housing starts to settle in, this piece kind of comes up as the turbo goes down, so you will have a little bit of overlap there. You just really want to make sure that that flex section is kind of bent at a little bit of an angle, kind of putting a slight bit of tension on that. Now we're going to go back and tighten up these to 15 Newton meters, and then we're going to go back and tighten those up finally to 30 Newton meters. And once we have everything fitted, we have this clamp almost all the way tight. You do want to take note of how close that bolt is going to get to the wastegate. Although the wastegate's not going to move here, you don't want that bolt to bottom out on the wastegate. So you do want to start this at least centered or closer towards the back of the car and getting this down to 20 Newton meters. And then once more, go in that little crevice above and below. Make sure that that pipe is centered on itself. Now we can start fitting the rear catalytic converter. So the torque spec on that exhaust clamp is, as I said before, fairly low. So we did use the impact ratchet here. It is about 7 Newton meters if you'd like to be specific, but I want to make sure this exhaust clamp is tight. All right, now we just got to start fitting up some of our coolant lines, and then last but not least, we will fill the turbocharger with oil and some of the liquid moly turbocharger additive. So already got the O-rings on there. I'm going to pull the cap off of this one using a little bit of Vaseline just around the O-ring. Again, we don't want these to get cut on installation. This turbocharger has a very nice machined groove around this bore, so the O-rings, if not lubricated, could obviously pinch and catch, and lubrication is definitely going to help put that in place. I'm not going to have to force it and worry about rolling that O-ring. That when we took this off, I was trying to keep the hardware organized, but I started to notice that it seemed like someone had been in here, and as we had noticed throughout the vehicle, there was definitely signs someone was in here. So there are 3 different bolts in this general area. You have 12 millimeter length bolts, 14 millimeter length bolts, and 16 millimeter length bolts. The coolant lines into the turbo have a 12 millimeter bolt. The oil line going into the top has a 14 millimeter bolt, and the bottom of the oil line going into the oil filter housing has a 16 millimeter bolt. So we've got the 12 millimeter hardware here. It is M6 by 12. So just gonna get those snugged up into the housing. Careful not to drop them. May have to wiggle the line a little bit to get that to line up. The coolant lines up here are going to be 9 Newton meters. A little bit over, but it's only 1 Newton meter over. Nobody will ever know. All right, we are at the point where I want to start putting some lubricant in the turbo. We do have the Liqui-Moly turbocharger additive, so I'm going to put some of that in there along with some of the oil that we'll be using for the oil change. I've already gone ahead and cut the tip of that off, and into the very top oil line where the line comes out for the oil filter housing, I'm going to probably put a dozen drops or so. I'm just going to go ahead and fill this bore up with the additive here. All right, and again, that's going to push out some of that when we put this oil line in. So that will be just fine for the O-ring. That'll help with that. All right, so 12mm bolts are going to go into the housing of the turbocharger. The 14mm bolt will go into the evap line that goes to the Venturi port in the turbocharger, and the 16mm bolt should go into the oil filter housing. So again, while we had this whole car apart, there was bolts throughout this that were not in the right place, and all the lines that go into here should have these short bolts. Obviously there was no leaks, but if someone were to put the 16mm bolt in there, it may have bottomed out in the housing before actually securing that line. So be cognizant of that. Make sure you have these shorter bolts going into the turbo housing, and that should be for all the coolant lines and oil lines. The evap line has a 14mm, and again, this 16mm, the longest bolt, which you shouldn't be seeing unless you take this line out, is going to go into the oil filter housing itself. Those are all been torqued to 9 Newton meters. We can go ahead and start refitting the charge air pipe in the front here, which looks like it's going to fall right into place beautifully. So because we cheated a little bit here and didn't take the charge air pipes off, obviously refitting this is going to be a little bit fun. So if you can get your hand in there, do your best to start these T30s by hand just to get them in as far as possible. The torque spec on these is 9 Newton meters. If you did take the charge air pipes off, you'll be able to get a torque wrench in there. I'm probably not going to be able to, so I'll have to use my calibrated fingertip. All right, I'll go back to that one once I get this top one started. So I do want to mention that if you did take this large Y pipe off, all the connections on the bottom that go into the lower intake manifolds are also 9 Newton meters, but hopefully you guys were able to do this the same way that we showed here. Now we are going to go ahead and refit the O2 sensor. So we didn't disconnect the connector at the bottom. However, we are still able to install this without binding this wire up. That being said, we will kind of clock it a little bit, just spinning it counterclockwise a few times, which is going to twist that wire, which will then allow you to install this hopefully in a similar fashion. And we didn't twist it enough. We got it. You can see there that it's not twisted anymore. So twist your O2 sensor just a couple times before reinstalling it. Don't start installing it just from it laying right there. So either using a 22 or a 7/8 wrench, or specifically an O2 socket. This one has ample room, so you can go ahead and get the wrench right on there. Just tighten that up. If this was a brand new O2 sensor, I probably would torque it to spec. Probably wouldn't. O2 sensors should really be in there pretty tight. So next up, we are gonna go ahead and install the evap line. Probably could have done this before doing the O2 sensor, but it doesn't exactly matter. So it is gonna go under the O2 sensor. It's gonna go under this fuel line in the back here as well. And if you recall, we have this falling apart blanket. There's one little slit in here. That slit is gonna go underneath the evap line. Kind of act like a little tray here, keeping this line protected. We can go and install that evap line. Actually, pull it back up. I'm gonna go back and replace this connector down the road, but hopefully your guys' connector does not look like ours. 3 pins gonna go to the pressure sensor. It's not really staying there because the connector is broken. Should be another connector back here somewhere. That one's also broken, so hopefully yours are in a lot better shape. So normally this would have a series of snaps, but with age, these do tend to wear out. So hopefully we'll get another one of these in the near future. And when I go back and replace those connectors, I will go ahead and replace that. But again, this should just kind of snap together and wrap around that line, keeping that line from getting too hot with the turbocharger right here. Now we can just kind of swing this. This slightly bent line is going to go back around the oil filter housing and into that small bore on the side where we inserted the Venturi. But we do have a new O-ring to install on that first, so let's go ahead and do that. So just like any other O-ring, get a nice pick underneath there. I'll touch the Vaseline. All right, so now the 14 millimeter, 6 millimeter bolt is going to be what's used to tighten up this bracket and hold the evap line into the turbocharger. So a little bit of a finesse to get it in there. So don't get frustrated if it doesn't line up right away. But you kind of have to go around the back of the housing and then turn it into place. So we're going to do our best job at trying to show you on camera, but there's really not much room. And then this will just get secured right here, like that. So we've got our charge air pipe fitted, got our harnesses pretty much dropped in place. We do want to remember to inspect and make sure our wastegate actuator line is good. The easiest way to do that, obviously if you're replacing your turbo, you may have had a boost leak, but you do want to kind of do a little diag in between and make sure that you don't have any issues. So just make sure there's no kinks, there's no cracks, there's nothing broken in here, and then obviously make sure it has flow throughout. So it seems like it's all right. There is a little bit of a issue with these, if you will, where coolant is getting through the vacuum system, and it can actually get into this, causing your wastegate actuator to get messed up. And actually, I've even seen where it will clog this line when the coolant dries up. So just be cognizant before you replace the turbo to do a little bit of background. But if you have mechanical damage and you're replacing the turbo, also keep in mind that there could be other problems starting to form. So while you have it all apart, what better time to take a look? I'm just going to refit that line on the solenoid, fitting that on there, and then securing it on the actuator. There's no clamps or anything. This is all just pressure fit because it's under vacuum. All right, let's get ready to install our turbo inlet and refit some of this harness down here. I'm gonna have to go back and replace that connector as well on the diverter valve. But all of our harnesses are plugged back in, our lines are plugged in. Make sure you got this little clip back here taken care of. I really don't like the covering there, but we'll get to that later. All right, yep, we're ready to put the air inlet on and continue wrapping this up. So just like the gasket on the lower section of the turbocharger, just stick a pick into the air inlet, pry that gasket out, and our new one supplied in our kit. Make sure there's no debris in there, everything looks all right. This is gonna be so much easier to fit than the one that was upside down and backwards in the car. And now when we go to install this, we do want to try to fit the lower breather connection first before worrying about anything else. So I am going to kind of put a hand on this to keep this up and try to engage that. You will want to make sure you hear a series of 2 clicks, not just one. You're probably going to have to manipulate it a little bit to make sure we get both of those on there. And we do have a new O-ring in there. So I'm going to put a dash of Vaseline on this as well, just to make sure that this thing goes all in there easily. All right, it's gonna go in between this wire harness right here. Again, it's gonna be a little bit tough. It'd probably be a lot easier if we did it the right way. That's why we're here, right? Trying to find a better way. All right, I don't know if you could hear that in my mic, but you can kind of see it actually fully engaged. You'll notice one of the clips may not be engaged if it is not, so. We also want to fit this harness right here. All right, again, we are going to go back and fit those connectors. They are bothering me that they are pushing off by themselves. I do need to resecure that harness there. That zip tie broke. Make sure all this is fit back into place. Reconnect this boost sensor here. And just kind of check over everything that you had off. Make sure nothing is out of place. Nothing is rubbing in a fashion it shouldn't be. All we got left to do before we could start the car is obviously we should have drained the oil beforehand. When you saw the oil cooler come off, a lot of that oil started to push out. Obviously, if we had drained the oil prior, it would have been fine. I would highly suggest to you guys at home, drain the oil, drain the coolant, and then probably do another oil change as soon as you start it up. If any of that oil and coolant are mixing, you're definitely going to have some issues. But if you're just doing the turbocharger, now would be a good time to go ahead and drain the oil and get the filter out of there. get a new filter in there, inspect that, make sure everything's clean. I would even probably go as far as consider replacing the filter housing if you have oil in there, which we actually have a video on that as well. And while the turbo is out, that is definitely a good time to replace that housing. You'll see in that video that there's a couple of tough screws in there, but we were able to get that out without pulling the turbo. Before we change the oil, we do want to just go ahead and put the PCV breather back on and finish wrapping up the air intake. So I'm going to fit the breather on that pipe we just installed, as well as down here. And if you're interested in this breather kit, it's a lot easier to install and remove than the factory unit. It's much more malleable and more durable than the factory unit. And we have a full DIY on this 034 Motorsport PCV breather as well. I'm going to fit the air inlet here. And now at this point, I mean, you could certainly go ahead and finish fitting the air box, but it would probably be good to just keep everything off so you can kind of get in there and make sure you don't have any oil leaks. I would do the oil service right now. Make sure you have no lights on the dash. Make sure that there is nothing leaking. Make sure nothing is rubbing, burning, what have you. And obviously we are going to have to let the vehicle rest for a little bit and make sure we have no leaks overnight. So we're going to go ahead and get a 30mm socket and remove this filter cap and then put the car up in the air and drain the oil. All right, now that we're mostly reassembled, aside from the air intake, we are going to perform the oil change. We do have a further, more detailed DIY on this if you guys would like to go see that. We're going to kind of breeze through this real quick and try to get to the end of this DIY for you guys. So it's going to be a 30mm to get the oil filter off, and if you want to know any more, go check out our other video on the full oil change. All right, let's get the car up in the air and drain the oil. All right, so one thing on this coolant hose, I do want to mention that it's definitely going to be easier to engage the clip first. Go ahead and push the clip in, making sure both sides of that are fully engaged. When you go to seat that on the radiator, you'll feel both sides of that click into place. There you go, give it a good tug, making sure it's fully seated. And that's pretty much it. Now you're going to be ready to vacuum fill the cooling system and proceed with that. You can obviously wash off any residual coolant that's down here while you're underneath here. And once that oil is done draining, we're going to go ahead and put that drain plug in and get that tightened up to spec. The kit does come with a new drain plug washer, so keep that in mind as well. All right, now that we've got slow drip coming out of here, we can go ahead and install our drain plug. Got a new drain plug, new gasket, and we will install a new filter up top as well. It's all included in this kit. And there we go. So we're going to torque that up to 30 Newton meters. Now you'll probably have some oil dripping down the subframe just like we did. Being sure to clear out those drains while you have the turbo off. We'll make sure that a lot of the oil or coolant that's in that valley will drain down through those drains. So you're going to want to kind of brake clean the bottom of the engine as well as the top and bottom of the subframe. So I'm just going to go ahead and move this back a little bit, and before we put the car down, I'm going to just kind of give it a good old brake clean shower. Now we're going to go ahead and lower the car down, fill it up with oil, and replace that oil filter. All right, we're just going to go ahead and pop the oil filter out of the housing and then do my little oil filter trick. Pinch it with a rag, get your thumb underneath it. And then there we go, no pick needed. New O-ring, a little bit of oil from inside. Get that all around there. You'll notice we have the billet 034 Motorsport oil filter cap, which is a very nice unit. The factory one is made of plastic and they're susceptible to warping and cracking. We do offer that as well at fcpro.com. We'll have that in the description if you guys would like to get one of those. All right, now just like the factory housing, 25 Newton meters is the torque spec, and we're gonna just send this one down. That is tight. Let me get my rag out of there. All right, we're just gonna put this whole 5-liter jug in here. Give you that bartender's pour. All right, I'm gonna put about half of this last one in here, knowing that I'm probably gonna put the whole thing in here, but these are a little bit finicky for setting the oil level. It's a lot easier to add than it is to remove. So I'm gonna finish with that, save this off to the side, and we'll double check that oil level when we get the car up to operating temperature. Throw that oil cap on. All right, now we're ready to go ahead and fill the cooling system up. And where you haven't put the heat shield on and we haven't put any of the intake piping in here, we do want to make sure that we don't have any fluid leaks, and we've assembled almost everything that we need to have the vehicle running, but not have everything on there that the vehicle would need to go down the road. So with that, we're going to go ahead and fill the cooling system up, and then we'll start it up and make sure we have no leaks. All right, now we are finally ready to refill our cooling system, and we're going to be using the U-View Airlift 2 cooling system filler. This is going to alleviate from any air pockets you may have in the system. If you just go through and fill the system as normally, you're not going to get a proper bleed, and you could have some overheating issues. You could be fighting an air pocket. The fans may not kick on, so when you're refilling the cooling system on most Volkswagen, Audi, or Porsche products, or any European vehicle for that matter, it is definitely ideal to have one of these in your toolbox. And we do have one of these linked in the description below, and it can be found at fcpaero.com. So we are just going to place this in here. It's going to sit in the coolant reservoir, and we will connect air to it in a moment. Getting this over to our bucket, and I have a 5-gallon bucket behind us with the Xerox coolant already dumped in there, and then I've gone ahead and refilled the jug with distilled water. So we're just going to do a 50-50 mix. If you live in a cooler climate, you may want to do like a 60-40 if you're in Alaska or northern Canada or something like that. But for us here, 50-50 should be just fine. All right, now we're just going to go ahead and close off this line here for a second before we get ready. I'm going to put the air on the other side of that. Now that we have our air hooked up, we are going to just draw enough coolant up to this point so that we can prime this line, and then we'll continue to suck the air out of the system before we go ahead and fill it. So with this valve closed, we want to make sure that we have a rag underneath this, because this little valve here will probably dump out a little bit of coolant. So have a little rag ready underneath your airlift here. And the little button on the side here, we'll have to get this seated in here. I may even have to pick up this tray to get, so you want to make sure you get that seated in there. You may have to manipulate the cowl here a little bit to get a good seal. So I'm going to draw a little bit of vacuum, crack the line, get us primed, and close it. And at this point, you're probably going to get a little bit more coolant than before. And the nice thing about this tool is that it kind of does the both. It fills the cooling system as well as checks for any leaks. Make sure that everything has been sealed. Everything that you've taken off has been sealed up. Obviously, if we forgot to disconnect something, rolled an O-ring, something like that, we wouldn't be able to build any vacuum, and you may even hear like a hissing sound. With that, sometimes you don't actually have any coolant leaks until you put pressure in the system as well. So don't use this as a end-all be-all cooling system checker. The best way to check for a cooling system leak would be a pressure tester, but this will at least make you aware that everything you've put back together is okay. We did just replace all those lines over there. We had that lower coupler off, and a lot of stuff up here, as well as the oil cooler. So it's good to just verify that we are holding vacuum before we fill the cooling system. That way we can make sure that we have everything situated before we have to go ahead and drain that again. So I've got it in the green portion of the gauge, which is about 25 inches of mercury. Just gonna let that hold for a minute, make sure it actually is holding vacuum. It should be good. I just heard the compressor kick back on, so we're pretty much out of air anyway. But take a second just to make sure you have no leaks. Make sure there isn't anything hissing, isn't any drop in that gauge while you're sitting here. And if you're in the green, you're pretty much good to go ahead and crack that valve. But we're just gonna make sure everything's all right here for a second, and we'll double check with you guys in a minute. All right, so the gauge has been holding pretty good. We're still in the green. We're right about 25 where we were before. I'm gonna go ahead and fill the cooling system up. You do wanna make sure you have the cooling apparatus, bucket in this case, or whatever you're using to fill the coolant above the airlift system. That's gonna kind of make sure that the coolant continues to flow even when it runs out of vacuum. So also make sure you have this in the bottom of the bucket. Go ahead and crack your line and let the coolant flow. I've got it about halfway cracked. You certainly could open it all the way. Keep an eye on your coolant in the bucket as you're starting to drain. The 1 gallon should be enough for this job. However, you may need a little bit extra if you were doing other repairs throughout with the cooling system drained. All right, and when you're pretty much done, this little float here will rise to the top. letting you know where your coolant is at. And I do believe when the top of this little float is at the line on the inside of the reservoir, that is your minimum mark, and then it rises up to show you you're at full. When you're using one of these, it also fills it up to just the right amount. So once you're done, you're pretty much ready to start the car up and go through the cooling procedure with the scan tool. And obviously once the car cools back down, it is good practice to just verify the coolant level after you're all said and done. Even if you don't see any leaks, there may still be a small air bubble that has surfaced. So after the car cools down, 24 hours later or so, just take a peek in here and make sure your level is still good. All right, so we're gonna throw our coolant cap back on. Make sure you get that fully engaged. You'll get the click of that gray little tab there. And then we are ready to go ahead and start up. You'll notice I don't have the heat shield cover on here yet. We do want to make sure that we don't have any fluid leaks. We did a lot of work in here. Aside from the turbo, we did that oil cooler as well. So we just want to have a good visual, make sure we have nothing leaking before we wrap up the repair. Now, once you started up your car, make sure you have no warning lights and make sure you have no coolant leaks or oil leaks up in front. Come back here and verify your oil level's okay before warming up the car. Obviously, doing an oil level check at cold temperatures is not going to be the exact same level, but you at least know you're in the range. You can always add some later. It's a lot harder to take it out. So make sure the oil level is good. If you were doing the oil cooler, you obviously have drained a lot of the oil, and we have done the oil change as well, doing the new turbocharger. So we started with about 7 quarts, 7.5 quarts, and we are right at about that point. We did drain it a little cold, so it's probably a little bit high. A couple of factors to keep in mind to try to make sure that your oil level is right on the money when you start the car up. Obviously, you want to make sure you have no lights on the dash either. We did have a lot of sensors, a lot of boost pipes. A lot of things were removed and put back into place. So you want to make sure before you warm the car up, the car is still running okay. And the next thing, we are going to be just letting the car warm up a little bit, and then we're going to run a weird little breathe procedure where we have the AC on and off and the heater on and off, and we have the car at idle as well as 2,500 RPM. And I'll go over that here in a second. We're just gonna let the oil warm up before we start revving the car. So another 5 minutes or so, the oil should be up to temperature, and we'll catch you guys in a second. So if you don't have the ability to use the scan tool to perform the bleed procedure, or your vehicle doesn't actually have the bleed procedure installed, I'm not certain on the specifics of which cars have it and which don't. However, in the instructions, it does list that there's a possibility that you will not have the ability to do so based on your engine control module. So for a vehicle that does not have the ability to bleed the cooling system with a scan tool, for 3 minutes, you'll have to have the engine at 2,500 RPM, obviously with the parking brake engaged, the vehicle in park, 2,500 RPM with the heater on high, AC off, and the blower on 0. Then, until the fan runs, you will let the vehicle idle, and you will also have the AC off and the heat on with the blower at 0. For the last 2 minutes, you'll have the vehicle back up at 2,500 RPM, you'll have the AC off again, and the heater on high. This is gonna make sure that we circulate the coolant throughout the heater core in the compartment of the vehicle, as well as the radiator, the water pump, and it'll make sure that we get all and any air out. Luckily for us, this vehicle does have a coolant bleed procedure, so once you get the vehicle running, we are going to be using VCDS through Rostec, and you're going to go into the engine computer. Once you get in there, you go into basic settings. From there, we will go down to, it's called Test Bleeding Coolant Circuit. Click on that. We're going to hit go. Oh, parking brake not operated. It's telling you it will not work because the parking brake is not operated. So we will abort this and we will try once more. We'll go back, do the same circuit, operate brake pedal and depress accelerator. You're gonna put the gas pedal to the floor, and it is gonna monitor the engine RPM right around about 2,000. I have the right foot planted all the way to the floor as far as it'll go. It's not raising the RPMs. So again, foot on the brake, floor of the car, and the ECU will take care of the rest. Follow the instructions on the screen, and the cooling system should bleed correctly. You're gonna hold this until the next step, and we'll see where this takes us. Oh, sounds like it's gonna tell me to get off of the brake here in a second. When the vehicle gets down off of idle, do not release the brake, do not release the gas. Nothing has changed up here, even though you hear the vehicle come down off idle. You're gonna keep holding on the brake and keep holding on the gas. It's literally going to do everything for you. It's basically just doing that procedure we discussed earlier, however, with the scan tool. You could probably benefit from a brake pedal depressor and something else to hold this so your feet don't go numb like mine. As you can see, I haven't lifted, and here we go again, back to the 2500, 3000 RPM. It's gonna start freaking out now, I think. It's gonna go up and down and up and down. Yep. Okay, now it's finished. It does say it's timed out or canceled, so if you are curious if your coolant level is maybe very low or has risen, you may still have an air bubble in there. If your fans didn't come back on, you may want to consider running this test plan twice. I'm fairly certain that everything's going to be okay. You can lift your foot off the brake and gas. We will go ahead and hit stop in the corner here. All right, now once we verify we have no faults, we can go ahead, shut the vehicle off. Obviously you want to go double check your cooling level, but do not open the cap at this time. Just take a flashlight, look through the reservoir, see where it's at. We did not have any coolant low messages, so I'm not too terribly concerned with that. We'll go ahead and let the vehicle cool down, and we'll go verify the coolant level before we go out for a road test. Obviously you're going to want to let the car cool down before you install that turbocharger heat shield as well. But at this time, give it another once over. Make sure you have no oil leaks, no coolant leaks. Make sure all the fittings on the oil lines on the turbo are good. And you'll probably have a little bit of smoking on startup, as you saw earlier, but that will go away, that will subside. Make sure the car is outside when you're doing this, or you have a well-ventilated garage with a fan possibly. That pretty much takes care of it. So we'll catch you guys up front in a minute here. All right, now that we have successfully bled the cooling system, we just want to double verify that we have no leaks. We don't have any lights on the dash, no low coolant warning messages, and no oil warning messages. So we're pretty certain that we don't have any leaks. However, it is good practice to just double verify. And I'm pretty happy with everything in the engine bay. So we don't want to just go back up to the reservoir, and you don't want to pop the cap because everything's still pretty hot. Just throw a flashlight in there and get a good eye at the level on the coolant reservoir from the side. It's a little difficult to see, but if you sneak down between the cowl and the top of the reservoir, you can see there's some coolant in the bottom, and it's just below the max line. So I will let this cool down a little bit more before I crack the cap, and then we'll adjust the coolant level to spec. Now, while this continues to cool down, we're going to finish assembling the portion of the intake we took out. We're just going to go ahead and drop this into the air box here. And then there's two provisions for the hardware to mount up. And if you recall from the beginning of this video, the right side was broken. We are actually going to be putting a new intake in this in another DIY. So if you'd like to see the 034 Motorsport carbon fiber intake be installed, don't forget to subscribe, and we will have a DIY coming your way. It doesn't have to be very tight. That's probably why the one on this side broke. And don't forget to tighten that one up, but obviously ours is broken on the intake. So now we're good to go ahead and install the cover here. You are going to want to make sure that it tips into the top of the radiator support here like so. Fit that all in there. And then these little clips attached in the front here. Kind of tucking those all in, make sure it's all secured. Now we're going to install the hood handle here. Make sure your clip is re-engaged. And then, as I stated upon removal, there are two keyways on this. So you will have to get it mounted in a fashion that those keyways match up. So be mindful of that. There we go. Give it a tug, make sure that clip engages. All right, now we're ready to go ahead and install our heat shield. Make sure you have it orientated the right way. The clip for the O2 sensor should be on the passenger side. It more than likely will not bolt up the other way. And again, if you guys remember from the beginning of the video, we only had 3 of the stands for the engine cover, which also mount this heat shield. We have these nice new Engine Beauty Dress Up 034 Motorsport little stands here that we're going to be installing. The factory torque spec is about 5 Newton meters plus 45 or 90 degrees if I recall. Obviously, we're not going to do that with these. We are just going to kind of snug these down. And just like factory, it presses right over those studs. So I usually stick a finger underneath to kind of find the stud. All right, now that pretty much takes care of it. We have successfully replaced the turbocharger in our B9 Audi S5, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If so, don't forget to hit that like button, get in the comments section if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and as always, we'll have plenty more videos on this vehicle and many others like it, so don't forget to subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.